break it off. Is there any brave girl that wants, or guy that wants to come and lead this side? Okay. Grace and Emma. Or all of you, come on here. All right, so we'll let you start first, and then we'll come in. So as soon as they sing the last love, then that's our cue to come in, okay? We'll start singing our part. All right, girls? You guys? Ready? Okay.
Take it from brother, guys.
Ready, girls? Love, 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 love. Yes. Christians, this is your call. Christians, this is your soul. For love your neighbor as yourself. Glory to God the highest. Glory to God in the highest. Glory to God in the highest. Peace on earth to Kingdom, kings forevermore. Kingdom, kings forevermore. Kingdom, kings forevermore. Praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, praise His One, praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one. Love this is our call. Precious Jesus, praise your soul. Love your neighbor as yourself. All together. For God loves
Can we see
You want me to take a picture and then I can send it to you, or you want to do it at that rate?
That would be great too.
Then you can just go here. I'll leave it up here so we'll remember.
Is this already chronological? This is the chronological?
The order I have you is yours.
I always wonder if there's a chronological order of all the minor problems.
Thank you, girls.
Yeah.
For helping. Sounds beautiful.
That's good.
Thanks for asking.
It says happy birthday back to all.
Happy what? Happy birthday?
That says right.
No.
Let me Chris Rowe.
I told Danielle, happy birthday. You'll name. no, this is the name of the book, or actually the name of the class. And Minor Prophets is a name given to the 12 books by Augustine in the 4th century. And Jesus never knew that name. Jesus knew the books by this name, which is Shtemesrei. Shtemesrei is the 12th. That's what they were called. That's still called that by the Jews, but the church calls them minor prophets. And they were called minor prophets by Augustine because he felt they were smaller books, so they were minor, not in content, but in size. So, but it's really called Shtemesrei. And Hebrew is read from right to left. So it's the opposite of the way you read. You read this way. Okay, you all have a minor prophet syllabus.
Yes.
Okay, we'll look at it for a second. Okay, this is an expositional study of the minor prophets. They're in chronological order. That's the way I'm going to teach them in chronological order, starting with Obadiah and ending with Malachi. This is a different order than the Jewish Bible, which is the Tanakh. They have where we see everything the same, and we have our Bible more in a chronological order. The Jews see the Old Testament in 3 parts: Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim, the law, the prophets, and the writings. And they see them in that order of importance. So Torah is the most important. We'll get into all these things later, but just to let you know. So the Old Testament for the Jews doesn't end in Malachi. Because in chronological order, if you read the book of Malachi, the last word of the Old Testament is cursed. And they don't like that, so they don't have that book last. It's in a different category of books. But even when the Jews read Malachi and get to chapter 4, verse 6, and even their chapter and verses are different, but it's the same book, they never end the reading with verse 6 because it would end in curse. So when the Jews read verse 6, then they read verse 5 again. So it won't end in curse. Just a little Jewish thing, you know. Okay. The main thing you need to know from this is keep a notebook to have your notes. I'm not having you write a paper in this class, so but we will from time to time look at your notes. So no notes, no good. Okay, keep notes, yes.
Is that okay if my notes are just in my Bible?
Sure. Yeah, that's fine. As long as you see just see the notes, see that you're keeping up and so forth. And so everything there is pretty self-explanatory on the syllabus. Pretty simple syllabus. So if you have any questions, you can get a hold of me. My email address is there. You can always shoot me a note if you have any questions about anything. Okay. Obadiah. His name is in Hebrew Obadiah, or Obadiahu, which means of God. You've heard of the Prime Minister of Israel, Netanyahu? That's a prophetical ending to his name, Yahu, which means of God. And the Tan is like gift of God. That's his name, the gift of God. Anyway, Obadiah or Obadiahu or Obadiah Hanabi, which is the prophet. Obadiah the prophet. I will show you things in Hebrew to maybe pique your interest so you will dive into it a little bit, because in your study it will be very helpful if you learn a little Greek and Hebrew. Very helpful, because basically the problem you have is that it's like taking 5-gallon jug of water and shoving that 5-gallon jug of water into a little water bottle. It ain't gonna work. And that's what the Hebrew and Greek language are compared to English. You are trying to shove that into this. And they have many, many words that English doesn't have, and many, many nuances and meanings. In Greek, there are 4 different words for the word if. Crazy, right? 4 different words for the word love. And so when you're reading, you think you got it, maybe not so much. You know? So when they translate word for word, or thought for thought, or a combination of both. If you do thought for thought, then it's not a translation anymore, it's a paraphrase. So in a real translation, you get to translate word for word. Well, that's pretty much impossible, because a lot of words you can't describe in one English word. That's why if you ever read the Old King James, when you get to 1 Corinthians 13, it's a great love chapter, right? Well, the Old King James doesn't translate the word love. It translates it charity. Ever notice that? Ever read that before? It says charity. The word that they're translating is agape. We don't have an English word for agape. And, you know, the one English word we have for love is supposed to cover everything. You love your dog, you love your cat, you love your husband or wife, you love pizza, you love your friends, you love fishing. That love has to cover everything. And it doesn't work. So, you know, in the original languages, they have many words for that. And then when you try to convey, let me give you an example, and then we'll move on. Peter says to Jesus, "Do you love me?" 3 times, right? So then when we go, well, what was that all about? Oh, well, Peter denied Jesus 3 times. So now Jesus is trying to get him to acknowledge it, 3 times. That's not what that's about. What is actually being said, Jesus says, "Peter, do you agape?" And Peter says, "Lord, I phileo." Peter, do you agape? Lord, I phileo. Peter, do you phileo? Lord, you know all things, you know I phileo. Well, what's that all about? Basically, Peter, would you die for me? Lord, you're my buddy. Peter, would you die for me? Lord, you're my buddy. Peter, are you really my buddy? Lord, you know all things, you know I'm your buddy. Peter wasn't ready to die yet. You miss that, don't you, in the English? See, that's why we get into language. So just to encourage you, don't be afraid of the languages, go for it. Okay, the minor prophets. We talked about the title, the Jewish title, Shtemestere, and the Christian title was given by Augustine, who was a 4th century, one of the church fathers. He was from northern Africa, and he, interesting character. He was the catalyst for Thomas Aquinas later on. He would be, basically what Augustine did was take the Greek philosophers and turn them into Christians. That was his big thing. And so he's revered by the Reformed Church and he's revered by the Catholics because Thomas Aquinas basically got his teachings from Augustine, and Thomas Aquinas is the Catholic Church. So Augustine, basically what he did, he didn't have great arguments for the Christian philosophy. You know, does God exist? Did God create everything? You know, all those big questions, we call them the cosmological argument, the theological argument, and all these big fancy words. But he was trying to answer those things, and Christians really didn't have great answers. So he went back to the Greeks that were writing, 300 years before Christ, and he particularly liked Aristotle, and one of his famous treatises, the prime mover, unmoved mover. I just want to give you just a taste of this so you understand why the church, the New Testament is Greek, why that, that philosophy permeates the church. Augustine had a hard time explaining, answering the question, what came first, the chicken or the egg? We could have that debate in here, and we could divide the class up. What came first, the chicken or the egg? Did Adam have a belly button? And all those kinds of things. So people were having a hard time explaining this, but Aristotle, who wasn't a Christian, he was a polytheist, came up with a whole idea called the prime mover and unmoved mover. You read all about it if you're interested. But basically, it boils down to this. Augustine was asking the question, so was Aristotle, where does man come from? And since you are finite, we were born, we die. Now you can be born and live forever, but you're not the source of everything, because there was a time 2 years ago you weren't here, right? So let's go back to your father. Same problem, right? Let's go back to his father. Well, we can keep going back, but to say that, well, what it's all about is an infinite series of finite men, that would be logical contradiction, and it won't work. So what Aristotle said was, and he had a lot of stuff, but just to boil it down, basically, when you have a child, you move that child, they're born. Then that child moves to the next one, and so forth, like dominoes. So Aristotle went back to the first domino and said, whoever moved the first domino was himself unmoved. Now, if you think about that for a minute, you go, oh, infinite, finite, right? We are finite. The universe is finite. So where did it come from? Aristotle said it came from the unmoved mover, which Augustine said, God. God is the unmoved mover. So he loved these kinds of Greek ideas, which were pagan, and brought them into the church. So the church is permeated with omniscient, omnipresent. These are all Greek ideas, not necessarily biblical ideas. Okay? But they served his purpose to kind of explain where he was coming from. So that's Augustine. You can, so Augustine really was enthralled with Aristotle. Now, Aristotle, you're going to hear a lot about him because he was the teacher of one of the major players in the Bible, and that's Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great, who we're going to spend a lot of time on because it plays an integral part in the Minor Prophets. And Alexander was the son of Philip of Macedon, one of the city-states of Greece. And so Philip wanted the best teacher available for his son. So he hired Aristotle. So Aristotle was Alexander the Great's personal teacher. And when we talk more about Alexander, you're going to see how, because Alexander the Great invented the Greek that you read in your Bible. The Greek New Testament, that language was invented by Alexander the Great. Not for the Bible per se, but, there's a lot of reasons he did it, but it turned out to be the language of the Bible. So that when you read the Greek New Testament, you're reading Alexander's Greek, Koine, the Greek. Fascinating stuff. We'll get into that later on. Okay, the Septuagint does not follow chronological order, which I'm going to. And you say, okay, what's the Septuagint? The Septuagint, and to make a big story real quick, when Alexander died and the world is changing, there was a library in Egypt called Alexandria. The city's Alexandria, named after Alexander. And the second largest library in the world was there in Alexandria. They had over 500,000 volumes. And they wanted to translate all of the world's famous books. And the most famous book was the Tanakh, the Old Testament. So they translated the Old Testament into Greek, which was the language that everybody that went to school studied. Greek in those days was English in these days. Okay? That's what it was. Okay, so if you were going to be educated, you were going to be looking for a good job, whatever, you studied Koine Greek. So they translated the Bible into Koine Greek, and that Bible is called Septuagint, which is the 70. It was actually 73 Jewish Greek scholars that translated the Bible into the Septuagint. This was the Bible that Jesus read in his day. Jesus was, in the language of the day, contrary to what you'll hear, was not Aramaic. The language of the day was Hebrew, Greek, and Latin. The same languages that Pontius Pilate put on the sign over Jesus' head. The languages that the people knew. And most of them spoke 3 languages, just like they do today. Very lingual. The only place it's not is here. We know nothing about almost anything. Yeah.
Spanish. What was the Bible written? I don't know if you mentioned that. I missed it. What was the Bible written in before it was translated to Kingdom Greek?
Oh, it was in Hebrew.
It was in Hebrew.
Yeah. There's a couple of little spots in the book of Daniel, and a few little passages that are in Chaldean. And where Daniel's talking, Nebuchadnezzar, there's a couple of little spots. But for the most part, it's all Hebrew. And New Testament, of course, is in Greek, with maybe the exception of Matthew. which most scholars, well, a lot of scholars believe that Matthew was actually written in Hebrew first, then translated into Greek, and the rest of the New Testament Greek. And you can tell that through the language. We know that Jesus read the Septuagint because he quotes from it. So, you know, you had to know it. Okay, so here's a list of the books that we're going to go through in this order. And how do we date them? We date these books by comparing what they're saying to each other. So if one of the guys is talking about, he's quoting Amos, then obviously he comes after Amos, right? Because it wouldn't make sense that how can he be before Amos if he's quoting Amos? So we use not only their quotations, who they're talking about, but what they're talking about, places, earthquakes, famines, different things, kings' names, different kings who we know are living at this, so we can start to fit them in to where they fall. So as we go through, we'll talk about, you know, those kinds of things. Okay, the order of the prophets, 8 of them come along before the Babylonian captivity. The big points in Jewish history are the captivity. You know, before the captivity, as far as minor prophets concerned, we have pre-captivity, then we have captivity, prophets that lived during the captivity, and then post-captivity, prophets that came after the Babylonian captivity. But everything hedges around the Babylonian captivity. From Israel, 2 prophets were sent. Amos from Judah was sent to Israel, and Hosea, who was from Israel. And then 6 prophets of those 8 were from Judah. Obadiah was sent to Edom. Joel, Micah, Nahum, Zephaniah, and Habakkuk. Then the restoration, there were 3 prophets, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi, and then Jonah was sent to Assyria. Okay, the themes. The great themes and truths of the principles of God and man, the condemnation of sin, the comfort to the remnant, and things to come. Things to come are near and far. They don't only talk about far things, or there'd be no accountability. When we think of prophecy, we tend to think of things that haven't happened yet, and since prophets could be stoned to death if they made one mistake, you would think that you'd prophesy things far enough off where they couldn't catch it. You know, all your prophecies were like 100 years out, and I'm home free if I'm wrong. But that's not what prophecy was. Prophecy was past, present, and future. Okay, so Jesus not only talked about the future, which he did, but he also talked about things in the past, which he did, and things in the present. Okay? And if you think about his ministry, he talked about that all the time. When they would, question him about, things in the present. in the prophecy of Daniel in Matthew 24, Jesus is talking about the end times, and he's telling the people that when they see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, to run. Okay? Well, when does that event take place? In the middle of the tribulation period. It hasn't happened yet. So he's talking about a future event. But also, he says, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, all the people would have said, whoa, what are you talking about? That already happened. The celebration of Hanukkah is about the abomination of desolation that took place in the temple with, you remember that? Remember reading about that? Okay, and Antiochus Epiphanes sacrificed a pig on the altar. And then there was a revolt, the Maccabean revolt. And the Seleucids were thrown out. The Jews, had this celebration that continues to this day, the Feast of Dedication, or Hanukkah. Now, Jesus celebrated Hanukkah. Everybody knew what the festival was about. It was about rededication. That's what Hanukkah means, dedication. The rededication of the temple. So now he's telling them that, yeah, that happened, but that was just a picture. That was a type. Because there's a greater event happening. You see, sacrificing a pig on the altar, that's bad. But the Antichrist is going to raise himself up on the altar to be, as God. That's worse. You see, so he's sorting out events. And they came to him all the time trying to trap him. And, well, what if this happened? What if that happened? If a guy's married 7 times, who's married to him in heaven? And all those kinds of questions. And he's sorting out their mistakes. Also, when he said, as it was spoken in Daniel the prophet, he's straightening them out there because the Jews don't have Daniel as a prophet in their Bible. They have him in the writings. So Jesus is telling them, you're wrong. Even the order of your books is wrong. So a prophet taught past, present, and future. Not just future things. And they talked about, we're going to see with the minor prophets, they talked about controversial things. They talked about politically incorrect things. If you want to be popular, certain things you don't talk about. You all know that, right? Especially in the cancel culture. You say certain things, you're done. Minor prophets had no problem with that. They spoke what was on their mind, and no matter what the consequences. And the consequences, most of the time, were bad. Because most of them got killed. So they talk about things religiously, socially, and politically. If you were John the Baptist, would you want to get in Herod's face and tell him that his marriage is illegal? What do you think that's going to get you?
Beheaded.
Dead. Yeah. Right. These guys are fearless. They just laid it out. They talked about the captivity and restoration, the Babylonian and Assyrian captivities and restoration, the first coming of the Messiah, They talk about the Great Tribulation, the second coming of the Messiah, and the Messianic kingdom. So they talk about all these subjects. The name Obadiah means servant of God, and other than his name, we don't know anything about him. His family, a lot of prophets talk about their family, but he did not. And he doesn't tell us during whose king reign he prophesied. So we have to figure out his dates by what he says and what he wrote about. He's quoted by Jeremiah 3 times. In Jeremiah 1:4, 9:14, 49. So he prophesied before Jeremiah. In verse 17, he quotes Joel 2:32. Or Joel quotes him in Joel 2:32. So he's before Joel. In verses 10 through 14, he talks about the sacking of Jerusalem, but Jerusalem was sacked twice. So which time was he talking about? And so, since the second sacking was in 586, that was during the time of Jeremiah, he had to be before that. So he had to be in the first sacking of Jerusalem. And so that puts him around 845 BC, when the Philistines and Arabs and Edom attacked Jerusalem. So this is prior to the Babylonian sacking of Jerusalem. So this is how we date him at around 845. We look at all the different facts, and then, you know, what is the most logical place he fits in here with the things that we know. So on the bottom there, you see this little chart. You see the prophet there, and you see the first hill is near fulfillment, and then you have far fulfillment. What the prophets didn't do was tell us the chronology of a lot of things. They just didn't. They just told us what was going to happen. For instance, on the day of Pentecost, the disciples are being accused of being drunk, and Peter says, no, they're not drunk, it's 9 in the morning. And he says, no, what you're seeing is what was spoken of by Joel the prophet. Well, Joel's one of the 12, right? Now, interestingly, if you get your Bible and you open up Joel and you open up what Peter's saying, you'll see that they parallel. Peter is quoting Joel the prophet, but Peter stops. Joel keeps talking, because Joel went on to talk about things that haven't happened yet. You see? So there's near fulfillment, there's far fulfillment. That's why the book of Revelation is so important. Because the book of Revelation actually chapter 21 and 22 is basically the only new information in the book of Revelation. The first 20 chapters are the minor prophets and major prophets. But mostly the 20 chapters are already in the Bible. What John does is he puts them in order. And he lets you know what's happening when. That's why the book is so important. Because in the Old Testament, they had a great deal of difficulty figuring out what was gonna happen when. You know, because you're reading about the millennium, then you're reading about the second coming, then you're reading about the first coming, and then you say, and it's like, what's going on when? And John put that all together. So, that's why it's a great book. But if you know the Old Testament, John is not new material. If you know the Old Testament, you'll recognize the book of Revelation right away. We are going to, with the minor prophets, we're going to spend a lot of time about in these areas, and there's going to be a lot of judgments, and but you're going to see Basra come up a lot, and Basra is, the name means sheepfold. Unfortunately, it's translated Basra, and it should be translated sheepfold, because when you translate it sheepfold, then a lot of things come into light. It makes sense. But not knowing it's sheepfold and just Basra, you miss a lot. Basra is the ancient name for Petra. Petra, the rock city in Jordan, which is in the land of Edom.
For what?
The land of Edom.
The Basra's translation of what?
Basra is sheepfold. And it's the city of Petra. Okay, I want to show you a little video about Petra, because Petra is going to be very, very important in our study. And see how we'll do this. Okay, well, we'll watch the video now, and then we'll take a break right after the video. We have 10 minutes, and then we'll get back to it. Okay, this is Mark Weems. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he's a foodie. He's a foodie guy, but he spends a lot of time, he does some really cool stuff I like a lot. So he'll spend a little time with his food, because that's what he's all about, food. But you know, but he does a pretty good thing here with Petra in a short amount of time. So you get a feel for what Petra was like.
My DVT blood clot stayed on my mind.
Gotta
Is
show you
there
the
another around
commercial.
corner? Or could it be a different story? I wanted to help protect myself.
Sunflower seeds and sliced almonds. I'm just gonna take a full spoonful of nuts. It's a little bit after 8 a.m. We are now at the entrance gate of Petra, just getting our tickets, and we're about to start hiking. But before we enter the park, I need to make a purchase and get some sun protection. This is called a keffiyeh, and it is the local Arabic headdress. And the red and white, and also this pattern, is the national color and pattern of Jordan. So I am prepared now to take on Petra. Got the headdress, protection from the sun. It's going to be a great day. Petra is the holy city of a nomadic Arab tribe called the Nabateans, and they built this Petra as their holy city, and they made a fortune by trade and controlling caravan routes, especially with myrrh and frankincense. And so they would trade around this entire Arabian Peninsula and the surrounding area, and that's how they made their fortune. And when they started getting so rich is when they started thinking about their afterlife, similar to the ancient Egyptians. And so they built this Petra, which is not just a single temple, but it's an entire rock city, as their holy city. And the city of Petra dates back to around 300 BC, and it was in its peak for hundreds of years. Most of Petra is all sandstone, and this is a sandstone wall here. And if you just touch this, you can just feel your hand just sort of grips to it. One of the things that I'm always concerned of when walking through a canyon is a flash flood, because if a lot of rain falls somewhere near, all of that water channels into a canyon. And so what's really interesting is that the Nabateans knew how to manage that water. And so they created dams and they created waterways where the water would flow when there would be a potential flash flood. We have just arrived to one of the most important and one of the most famous landmarks and attractions at Petra and in Jordan. This is actually the tomb of one of the greatest kings of the Nabateans. And it's called the treasury because it was believed that there was some treasure stored in the top, but it's actually a burial tomb. You can see so many different architectural designs, from the Corinthian columns to the Greek influence on the architecture, and then all carved into the rock. And when you are here, even though you're in the middle of a canyon, like a canyon entranceway, to me it almost feels like a city plaza. There are lots of people here, but also just because it's this open space surrounded by canyon walls. You've got the main landmark in the front here, the treasury, and it has like a city center feel to it. We are making a quick break for a cup of coffee. Can't get enough of Arabic coffee. We are taking a little hike now, walking through a cave and up the side of the mountain. Oh, hello. Petra is known as the Rock City because it's built in rock, but there are also a couple of other names for the city. One of them is the Red Rose City because of the red rocks, but the name that I really like is the Lost City. And what's really fascinating to me is that the whole city was built, but then it became deserted. And during the time it was deserted, it was covered in sand, and so it became lost. And it wasn't until the year of 1812 when a Swiss explorer came and he rediscovered Petra. So to think that it was all covered in sand for 1,000 years is fascinating. We are getting a lookout view now of the amphitheater. You can see it down below there. It is just amazing how it is carved out of rock. We're walking up some stairs on a rock, leading to a series of what's called the royal tombs. Oh, as soon as you step into this tomb, you can feel the cold air coming from it. Later in the day, we are gonna hike to that point over there. Right there. This is a really cool tomb behind me because you can really get a sense of how it is carved right out of the rock mountain. And you can see the top of the mountain up there, and it is carved right out of it. restaurants within the archaeological city. So we have just stopped for lunch. We're at a place called the Basin Restaurant, and it's all buffet style. They have a bunch of different salads and some main dishes. And this is the dish that we actually ate yesterday called maguba. And it's rice with chicken and then all those aromatic spices. Yeah. It's nice and aromatic, and again, you can really taste that chicken broth. Some beef stew. Now I'm having a big salad course. Lots of vegetables. There's onions and tomatoes and green peppers and olives and cabbage. And I just kind of mixed everything up together. And there's hummus somewhere below here. Oh yeah, there it is. Salad is wonderful. Chase that with a pickle. And it's salty and sour. Lunch is over. We're now taking an afternoon hike to the monastery.
Thank you.
We're just walking up the mountain, and one of the vendors who has a shop here has given us a cup of tea. That is the Jordanian Bedouin hospitality. We have made
Good grammar and spelling are important, but if you want to write essays that inspire,
it to the top ridge here, hiking for probably about 45 minutes or so. 1,000 steps up, and I'm not even sure what we're gonna see here, but we're about to find out. We made it to what is called the monastery, and originally it was also a tomb, and it looks very similar to the treasury, but it's actually 3 times bigger than the treasury. The reason that it's called the monastery is because after it was a tomb, it was then occupied by a Christian chapel. We are hiking above the monastery, and the viewpoint is going to be called the Top of the World viewpoint, which they say is one of the best viewpoints in Petra. We are walking on a road, and we're about to pass through a gate which was built by the Romans about 800 years ago. The Romans came to Petra, and they started building on the existing construction, including the main roadway which runs right through the middle of Petra. Just about made it out of the canyon and out of Petra. We're heading back to the hotel, and then in a couple hours we're gonna have dinner. For dinner tonight, we're at a restaurant called Alcantara, which means arch. And this is a restaurant that's in a stone structure, but it sort of has a Bedouin theme to it. We are starting off with another fantastic looking spread of the meze dishes, and also having a cup of Arabic coffee as well. And I'm gonna get started on these salads.